Joshua 9, verses 1 to 27. In Texas, they call it Joshua. We'll do our regular pronunciation here. 1968, I left Oklahoma Christian College to go to Baylor University to work on a doctorate. I was going to do New Testament, which I had interest in. I got the catalog and the schedule. Old Testament was required. Oh, great. So there it is. It's going to have to be done, so I might as well go ahead and do it. That first day, a guy walked in, he was 75, slightly bent over, dignified looking man. He did not have on a skull cap, but it almost appeared that he did. He had some big leather tomes in his hand, 3 or 4 big, great, thick leather books. He flopped them down on the table and promptly went to work for 3 hours lecturing about the Old Testament. I made about 5 or 6 pages of detailed notes in that. When I went back to look at those notes, I realized I didn't understand a word I had written down, and I didn't understand a word he had said. So I went and dropped that course that day. He saw me later on and said, "You didn't need to drop that course." Oh, yes, I did. Now, after I'd been there a while and kind of got my feet wet, well, I went back and had to take that course and did okay because I kind of knew what they were talking about. But here we are, studying that old Bible. I've said lots of times that I ain't good in the old Bible. That means a lot of things, and I'm going to say several things about it. One of the things it means is everybody skipped out today. They heard I was preaching, they heard I was teaching, so that shows a certain amount of wisdom in making life choices. Nevertheless, what we're involved in is a study of what must surely be one of the world's greatest military campaigns. There are very few wars or military campaigns that you read about where most everything goes well. It's usually kind of like this, and they had some glitches, but for the most part, they got the job done. Now, I need to confess that when I read that, I get shudders, because what they did was kill everybody. This was an aggressive war of origin. They started it, and they ended it, and they were killing everybody along the way. We'd have some problems with that now. That just killing everybody didn't quite work. I want to say a word or two about their military campaign, because when you analyze it, you realize that you can isolate out of that some strategies and some things that matter and might apply today. And when you read history about military, you find it there. First thing is, if you decide to have a battle, do your best to have overwhelming force. Think about January the 6th, when we had all that stuff that went on at the Capitol. There's a whole lot of stuff about that we could discuss and debate forever, and everybody would have different opinions. But one thing that strikes me is they weren't ready for that. They had not done what they needed to do to get ready. What they needed was about 1 million cops with swords and cannons and machine guns standing around saying, "Don't misbehave. Everybody act nice." And everybody was doing. What they've been doing is they came on these people, these Canaanites, with military force, and it was overwhelming. There wasn't any resistance. Second is the element of surprise. All of us are old enough that we've heard a lot and read about the Battle of the Bulge in December of 1944 and the following after that. It was almost like Germany surprised the Allies in that attack. They did surprise them in a number of ways, And as you look back on that, you think about, did we forget that we were at war? What were they doing? What they were doing was they were resting and pausing and not paying attention, and they got surprised, and the result was awful. There were thousands and thousands of people that died that didn't need to. Well, here come these Israelites, and boy, they pull off some serious surprises. They're really good at that. And when you hear an analysis is, what you don't want to do is lose the element of surprise. If somebody, when Jimmy Doolittle and his guys went over to bomb Japan, they had to take off from the carrier way farther out in the ocean than they meant to, because they lost those boats were out there, and they sent word back, look out, the people are coming. So they lost the element of surprise. And one last thing, and I'll get off of that. When you are at war or in combat, or when you have adversaries, and most of us found ourselves in lots of situations where somebody is not on the same side that we are, that's not on the same page, you can always know and assume that people on the other side are scheming, that they're making up plans what to do to defeat you. The Israelites made plans. They had leadership levels. They had divisions where somebody was in charge and somebody did this and somebody did that. And their schemes were brilliant. As I read that, I think, gosh, had I been there, I don't think I could have thought of that. I certainly would have understood that I needed to after somebody else did think of it. But that's what's going on. And now we come to a new wrinkle. The Gibeonites, city of Gibeon. North and a little bit west of Jerusalem. About like most of the other places that they had invaded, not as important as Jericho, but different. They heard what was going on. They heard about their understanding, the Hebrews' understanding that God was giving them the land. That's bad news. Like, oh my, is their God greater than our God? What? And they also heard that when the Israelites came, they killed everybody and burned the cities. Now, what are they going to do to us? Put yourself in that position. Is what are you going to do about that? You could run to where? You might scheme with some other countries, some other cities. They did. That went on. That is said just before the narrative about Gibeon. But the odds are not too good that that's going to work. So what they did is went to work among themselves to try to figure out what to do about it. And Joshua says they used cunning. I don't know that I remember exact wording on this sign, but I'm sure that years past you all saw the sign, which was down south on the Broadway extension, words to this effect. Age and experience almost always defeat youth and cunning. That's probably not it, but I want to talk about cunning a while. When I got out of college at Abilene Christian, 1960, I went and moved to a little town in Central Texas to be the minister. They hadn't had a minister for 2 years because they'd had a big fight and split up, and they told me that at that time there were more people in that town that were church across that never went to church than there were that went. And that was my first job as the preacher, was to get them back in. And you've heard me say that I went to work on that fervently and got exactly that many. What they've been doing for a preacher, a Bible teacher from Abilene named Gatewood, excuse me, my brain is dead, Lightfoot, who was a good pal of mine, got that job for me, and so I went there. And I learned several things right away, the main one being, which I've said in public several times, I learned that I wasn't cut out to be a preacher. That was not the right career for me, and so I got out of that pretty quick. I messed him up for 3 years, but I promised God that if he wouldn't make me teach any more 8th grade Bible classes, I wouldn't mess up any more churches. And so far, we both kept our vow. But I also found out when I moved there that there were several people in that little church that knew way more about the Old Testament than I did. Well, what kind of an unpleasant surprise is that? Here I'm supposed to be the leader, and I mean, they really knew a lot about the Old Testament. I found out later on that what they knew was stuff in the Old Testament, but not very much about it. Now, all these years later, I'm looking back on that. But I moved away from there, about killed me, because I thought I would never feel good again after I left those people. I'd grown to love them so much in 3 years. I was a single guy, and so I hung out with them all the time in every possible way. But like they do with preachers, after you move away, they call me to come back down there and hold a meeting, have a gospel meeting. Oh, great. I'm looking forward to that. So I did. The last night, I preached about the great treasure hid in the field and the pearl of great price. I remember the sermon, it had 2 points. The guy could tell a treasure when he saw it, and he paid the price to get it. I come back to Oklahoma Christian College back to do my job, and I get word that after I left, there was a young guy there that I had known reasonably well. He was real active and vigorous, had a good personality, and was really good at making money. He was busy, knew how to scheme and do things, pull tricks off and make money. And he had gotten baptized by the local guy after I left, based on that sermon that I had done. Oh, well, that's means you didn't fail completely. You got through that, and something good came out of it. But that wasn't the story. This guy devised a scheme to make money. Nearly everybody in that area, the men, most were farmers, but if they weren't, they drove pickups. Everybody drove a pickup truck. You can't imagine the different kinds of trucks you saw. They were all the way from trucks that didn't have any door on them to brand new long ones. You know how that goes. Big pickups. What this guy did was to get access, especially to General Motors pickups, and he sold those at a discount to farmers, and they paid cash for them, most of them. He didn't give them the title. He said, I'll give you the title soon, but they haven't got it ready yet. He took those titles and mortgaged them to get cash. So these farmers don't own their pickups because they haven't got the title. Even though they paid him for them, they don't own their pickups. He used his religious conversion to throw people off, and he sold hundreds of pickups in that area. He had already been doing it before that. He just used that religious conversion as a tool to fool everybody a little bit. Well, that immediately, I said immediately after I left, that scandal broke. And what that meant was all those guys here are these farmers and people in that community that don't own their vehicles, and they've got thousands of dollars invested, and they own nothing. As a side issue, he had been banking with 3 different banks, small town banks, and he would send money on Friday night to the bank to cover what he had done that week, and he had a row that he did a routine. On a particular Friday night, a woman in one of the banks got suspicious about that and didn't pay that night. She called a meeting of officers to get together and all that. And the outcome of that was 3 banks were broke. They all 3 closed. Because he not only had sold the pickups, he had broken 3 banks, three small town banks. What is cunning? It's a decision to fool somebody, to deceive somebody. I'm going to pull something on somebody for some good reason. It's this. That's followed by a scheme, a method to do that. What's going to be the details of how we go about this, followed by execution. And then, of course, followed by results. These Gibeonites were cunning, and they devised a scheme. We do not want to die. We don't want our city burned. We don't want all of us be killed, because that's what's going to happen here as well. So I tell you what, let's do. Let's pretend to be from way off, poor, troubled, but humble and willing to do whatever you want us to do. So they rigged it up. They took old, worn out wine skins, put the wine in it. They had bread, which they had taken for their journey. They said they'd come a long ways, way far off. And it's dried out and crusty and moldy, they said. And it was. And their clothes were torn and tattered and worn out. And their animals were tired and bushed and bad shape. That's how it is. And so what we're doing is requesting that you agree with us to let us live, and we'll do whatever you want us to do. That guy that I'm talking about in Texas, that's what he did. He made up a scheme and pulled it off. If you're wondering how that all worked out, I need to tell you, General Motors ate that. I don't know that I have greater protection for General Motors, but they figured out right quick that their corporate name would not tolerate that. So they gave the title for those pickups to their owners, their prospective owners. And the guy went to jail for a while after people in the community drove by his house and shot him. I don't think any of my friends did that. Some of them may have been, but they drove by his house and boom. Just by way also of the story, his dad was one of my favorite people that I ever knew. My understanding is that he was the checkers champion of the 36th Division, a Texas division. He was a really smart man, but what he did for a living was drive a gravel truck. And he worked a lot on that gravel truck areas where I saw it. And he would be working and sweating. He was a profuse sweater. And he'd raise up in a little bit and say, I never saw anything that easy. So if you hear me say that, you'll know who I stole it from. Now, that's not what they were supposed to do. The Israelites were not supposed to be making survival covenants with the Canaanites. What they were supposed to be doing, if we adopt that approach, supposed to be killing them all and giving you this land, and you go in and take it and kill everybody. But they touched their heart. Well, gosh, these guys have got it rough. Maybe we ought to go easy on them. So they made a covenant. They took an oath. Okay, we're not going to kill you. Let's think about that for just a second in our terms. I suspect that most of you would say that sometime in your life you have said something that you wish you could take back. Being a public speaker for my whole lifetime, I need to say there's a lot of that in my life. There have been times when I had to go hat in hand and say, I said thus and so, and I need to take that back. let me eat that little humble crow here. They were not in a position to do that. When they made that oath and swore by the living God of the Israelites, they thought they had to keep it. We said we wouldn't kill them, so we won't. What we are going to do is make slaves out of them. Drawers of water and hewers of wood. Meaning they're going to do all the work. That's three main things that have to be done for us to get by. We've got to have water and we got to have wood. So that's what they're going to be doing. Now you understand that Joshua was written way long after the actual fact. This, what we've got in the Bible, was written way later. But at that time, the writer says to this day, they are still drawers of water and hewers of wood. Made slaves out of it. We could draw all kinds of conclusions from that, from our perspective. One is the desire to survive. What will a man give in exchange for his life? We've all seen people in all kinds of situations where death might be imminent, and they dreamed up schemes and approaches, did everything they could to live through it. And some of those stories are really touching. I'll just do one simple. We all know about Bataan and Corregidor in the Philippines. Had that death march where they lined everybody up and marched them, 60-something miles. I forget how long it was. And a lot of them died on the way, and many of them died after they were in the prison camp and all that. My dad in Jefferson County worked with a guy who was in there. He was captured and went on that death march, and he was wounded, had some kind of injury, and he had fashioned for himself a homemade crutch of some sort out of a limb, out of a tree limb. And he told my dad that as we were marching along, somebody would fall. That means he was going to die, because they just went hit him in the head with a rifle butt and killed him, or stuck him with the bayonet, or shot him, or whatever. And if you couldn't keep up, that meant you were going to die. They just killed you. They didn't want to mess with you. So my dad said, well, what did you do? And he said, he got this look in his, my dad tried to reproduce the look. He said, I throwed away that crutch and kept up. They sent him back to Japan, where he was for the whole war. Was that March in February of 42? And the war was over in August of 45. He worked in the mines in the actual Japan island till the war was over. His family didn't know where he was. They always thought he died in the Philippines back when he was there. He lost half his body weight. He was a pretty good sized guy. Weighed less than 100 pounds when he got out. People want to survive, and they do all kinds of things. And in this case, the cunning works, sort of. We're going to be slaves, but we're not going to be dead. Just by way of personal reflection, back before the Ukrainian war started, I was in debate with myself about should they fight or should they yield. Putin's not going to kill all of them. If they yield, he's going to enslave them. They're going to be subject to it. But they're still going to be alive. They decided to fight. Hundreds of thousands of them have died, and they've killed hundreds of thousands of Russians. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? And when I get that figured out, I'll let you know. You can know what to think about that when I get that all cleared up about what was the best thing to do. But their cunning was to survive. And so they did. But to that day, they were still slaves. Again, by way of a little side issue, one of our principles in our interpretation of the Bible is we need to copy approved examples in the Bible. New Testament. I had to do some work on that better when I was down there. When I was taking my exams, at the end of my program, one prof had said, I want you to write on your exam about the method that is used by your community to interpret the Bible. Okay? And then devise a better one. Okay. So I wrote ours. If there's a command there, you need to do it. Example, you need to do it. It's something that you have to draw an inference. I'll do that. Yep. When it was time for me to defend my exams, they call it orals. That means the faculty sits over here and you sit over here and they question for a good long while and try to take you apart, which believe me, they can do. When it's 10 or 12 guys and you lose. Particularly if somebody wants you to lose. But it was a pleasure to find out they didn't want me to lose, so they weren't too hard on me. But those Baptist professors did not know about that methodology. They never had heard that before. They knew all about the Church of Christ, except they didn't know that. So they must have worked on me for an hour about that. Here's this approved example. Does that mean that God approves slavery? And if he does that mean we're supposed to do it? When I get that worked out, I'll get back to you. We've had one civil war about that and other things, but anyway. So, they saved their lives, so to speak. But it's just getting started. It's going to get worse and worse and worse because they're going to keep going and they're going to keep killing. And they're going to be successful at it until they're not. We know what actually happened in the history of the Jews is in 722, the Assyrians came down from the north and defeated Israel and carried them off, the northern kingdom, and that was the end of it. People have been looking for the northern kingdom ever since. I'm sure you've heard the theory that American Indians are that northern kingdom that got carried over to the continent here. Yeah, we hear all those conspiracy theories and all that. But what was left was the southern kingdom, Judea, etc. And by the time of Jesus, they weren't much. They were small, and they had to go, they not only went through the Babylonians, then they had to go through the Greeks. The Greeks pretty well took care of everybody and did impose Greek culture on the whole world, including them. So that Koine Greek, Street Greek, was their language, one of them. And then the Romans. Along come the Romans and really do a job of it. So they didn't get the whole world. That didn't happen. That just didn't happen. They got a little pitiful until AD 70, when they kept on misbehaving and the Romans came in and tore Jerusalem down. The record was that there was not one stone left on the other. Y'all should have done better than that. Anyway, so there we are. We're going to study much more battles. Next week we'll study some more, and I'll say some more nonsense. But I've saved a few minutes so we can do what I like to call a little chat about the old Bible. I've got some stuff that is pertinent to all of us, and all of you will identify with, because you've got the same kind of history that I've got. I'd like to give some meanings and some considerations to this thing that I've said repeatedly as a joke, that I ain't good in the old Bible. I need to say modestly and humbly, but a little bit boastfully, That doesn't mean that I haven't spent lots of time with the old Bible. When you're 86 years old and have got a PhD in religion, you've been through, from the time I was 0, going to the Church of Christ and doing everything we did, Bible school and all the lessons and everything, year after year after year after year about the old Bible, and then college, and then graduate school, and then I've done lots and lots and lots of study about the old Bible. What does that mean? It means that that Hebrew Bible and the Jewish nation that used it, still is a little bit complicated. So with your permission, I'd like to say some things about that. Back to that business of me discovering that there were several people in the church there at this little town where I was who knew more about it than I did. Let me say also quickly, they didn't know more about the New Testament than I did. I knew more about that than them. My intensive study had gotten me in good shape there. But the old Bible, they knew more about it than I did. Honestly and good. So let's let's do a little exploring. One of the questions that came up, sometimes in formal arrangement, but mostly just in conversation, is how did we go from Judaism to the church as we know it, to Christendom, if I could use that expression, because the whole world did that, except the ones that stayed Jews. When you study that, some things that you're impressed with, first of all, Jesus and his disciples were Jewish. They had learned all that, particularly him, and they had practiced it. When we studied the youth of Jesus, he stayed back there when his parents went home. He needed to be about his father's business, meant he was in there arguing with the scholars about the theological ideas. And when we study the early church, we know that the Old Testament was the main source for them of Bible. What Bible the early church had was the Old Testament, and then the oral sayings and words of Jesus that were memorized and passed on, but not written down yet. And then shortly, the writings of the Apostle Paul, which Churches of Christ are really expert at. But in Churches of Christ, everywhere I've been, people know a lot about Paul and his writings. So they had three parts to their Bible, so to speak. So there it was. They were still using that. And when we studied Paul, when he went somewhere, he went to the synagogue and preached to them and argued with them and got run out of town or beat up or something else. That Old Testament was a force that had to be reckoned with. And then while we're involved, we come to that Jerusalem conference because there was a big question of, okay, here's the real church, which is Jewish, and here's Paul out here preaching to the Gentiles. Is that all right? Is that okay for him to be doing? And there were two opinions about that, yes or no. So they went up to Jerusalem to what we call the Jerusalem conference, and we all know about that. And they decided, well, yeah, it's okay for the Gentiles to be involved, but let's tell them to behave themselves like Jews. That stuff that they told them to do, don't eat blood, and don't, etc. That's Jewish stuff. So that Jewish stuff is still clinging on. And then we come to Galatians, and Paul is mad as a hornet about that Jewish stuff that's horning in on Don't you be doing that circumcision, This prophet I had it better like that. No, the prophet wasn't better, it was a seminary. The year that I went to the Baptist Seminary at Fort Worth. This prophet was teaching English, roared and raved about how mad Paul was when he wrote Galatians. We just went through that. He was mad. Because they were going back from the gospel that he had been preaching to that Judaism stuff. Well, church history, there are books and books and books about that. If you really want to study how that came about, there are lots of books to say. But anyway, that's the process. Paul went through it. He went from yes, no, maybe, no. So when we divide up his letters, the very first ones are about the end of things, and then come the anti-Judaic epistles, where he's opposed to that. And in Romans, when he talks about the Jews, he talks of them as lost, and says, I would give up my own soul if my brethren in Jesus, the Jews could be saved. And then he makes the puzzling statement, so all Israel shall be saved, which we've spent hundreds of years trying to. I stayed up all night, 2 different nights, writing paper about that, explaining what it means, so all Israel shall be saved. And so I'll get back to you on that too. See me after class and we'll finish with that. Anyway, there we go. Now, when you think about those hundreds of years of Jewish history, think about all the complications, the arguments, the disagreements, the separation, the preaching that went on. I want to take a scholar's approach to a number of things in the Old Bible. Now you know all this already, but whether you thought of it like this is another matter. When you study any area of scholarship, as a scholar, what you do is you back up and try to see patterns in that. So that's what I'm about to do with the Old Bible. The first one and the biggest one. There was an ongoing controversy that went on forever and still does. Does God reward and punish now directly? Or does he have some other plan that's different from that? That's a question about the nature of God and his work. You remember in John 9, Jesus and his disciples are there and they encountered this blind man. And the disciples said, who sinned? This man or his parents, so that he was born blind? The prevailing view in Israel, Judea, and in the Old Testament, the prevailing view, the most of the verses, are based on the principle that God does reward and punish directly. And if he doesn't do it to you, he'll do it to your son or your son's son or somebody. Well, that's how it is. But that is not all that it's there. There's also the principle that no, that is not what he does. Because the question is, okay, if God punishes and rewards directly, how about all my neighbors down here that are crooked as chicken leg and fat and sassy and doing everything they can that's the wrong thing, and they're doing fine. God isn't punishing them, but he might punish them. Well, that doesn't have anything to do with him. The fact is that, and this is said, God reigns on the just and the unjust. The earth feeds people that are faithful and religious and people that aren't. And you and I both know that a good part of the time, who does better is the biggest crooks. My line about politicians is, how can you tell when they're lying? And the answer is when their mouth's moving. And it doesn't particularly matter what the party is, you can say that about everybody. Every once in a while you encounter some political person who tells the truth all the time, but they don't ever get anywhere. They're not in power. So that issue is there to be dealt with. Now, here's how that has happened to me in my lifetime as a psychology prof and counselor. Somebody comes in and baby has died, and they say, is that God punishing me because of something I did? Or is he sending me a message that I'm supposed to do different? Do you think so? They laid that on me. Okay, Mr. Counselor, say something that's gonna make some sense here. What do you think? No, I don't think no, I don't. Because once you accept that that's how things happen, so, there's several of us in here who have cancer. In my case, it happens to be on the end of my nose. Several of us have got heart trouble. This Betty's about to have a heart transplant. Well, here's mine right here. You can see it. You see the outline up there in my shirt. All of us, excuse me, have things happen. And all of us, we spend most of our time seeing doctors, don't we? Name somebody that doesn't have, et cetera. And one thing out there is it'll be a time when there ain't gonna be no meat in Texas, Georgia. Ain't gonna be no meat. I don't think that's God's message that I'm doing wrong. I think the message can come to me, but I don't think that. No. No. That's Joe. His friends say, you must have really done awful to make this stuff happen to you. I am a sinner, he says, but I didn't do anything bad enough to make this happen. So there's that issue. So here's Mr. Counselor saying, no, I don't think that's a message to you. The way it comes the most often is parents say, my kids are not doing the way I want them to. Is that God punishing me because I've done wrong? I have to say, looking at what they've done, it looks to me like they've been doing it right. As much as we can know what is the right thing to do with kids, it seems to me like they've been on the right track. So there's that. Second, good king, bad king. They had the time when they had the judges, you know, all that we've studied that, and they didn't like it. All the other nations around here have got a king. Why can't we have a king? Well, what you're supposed to do if you're a good, faithful Hebrew is shut up. You're not in charge. But that's what we want. We want a king. And they said, no, you better not get a king because the king will tax you and get all your money and get all your animals and send your sons off to fight in war. And you'll never have another peaceful moment. So they kept on pushing until they got a king. And sure enough, there it was. I was reading about Solomon this week. One little place. He sacrificed 20,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep. Sacrificed them. Now, what does that say? And he had 1,000 women, 700 wives and 300 concubines. What? If somebody was doing that kind of stuff now, you'd back up and say, well, that's so crazy. What? And the women would all say, Mr. Smart Aleck, what that said, he had 1,000 women. It didn't matter a whit what they wanted. It couldn't have been less than what. The reason I'm saying that is I am married to a woman for almost 59 years, and she matters and says it. It's not just me living in this family, it's her. Now, all those 1,000 women didn't get to be that kind of woman. They didn't have kids. They didn't have families. They didn't have. So, good king, bad king. There's just most wonderful stuff is said about the kings, except when it isn't. Sometimes it's, they did bad and all that. Good king, bad king. Number 3 is one of my favorites. Is God the God of the Hebrews only, or is he the God of all? It depends on when you plug into the Old Testament. When they got out of captivity, he's the God of the Hebrews, and you married the one, you get rid of them, you don't you have anything to do with them. You can't engage in business with them. You can't do anything. But then there's also the thing of, no, God loves everybody. Y'all know that I married Jason and Mindy in July. I was the preacher for their wedding. And Mindy said to me, I want us to have fun. I don't want you to preach a serious sermon. Okay. So I put in a joke. My question was, I picked Ruth as the text for us to do because Ruth is my favorite love story. I use that in my counseling because a woman might come in and say to me, I want to get married. Do you really? Then you've got to act like it. You've got to act like somebody that wants to be married. What does that mean? Well, let's explore it and see. Ruth is just the sweetest love story. But the question is, why is it in the Bible? It's not like anything else in the Bible. Why is Ruth there? The answer is she was a Moabite. Moab is right across the Dead Sea from Palestine. And she's the great grandmother of David the King. What? A Moabite is what? That's the whole point, is God loves everybody. Isaiah makes that point. That point is made in a whole lot of ways. And Luke makes it in his writings in Luke and Acts. Christ was a universal Savior. He didn't come for just one bunch. He came for everybody. Now, that issue of the chosen people, what does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean that God doesn't love everybody. So that's one of the things. I'll do one more than I got to hurry up and get through. The question of riches. The Old Testament's real clear. If you do right, God's going to bless you. So we got Abraham. He can't do anything not to be rich. Every decision he makes, he gets richer and richer, and on and on. And it's a sign that you're doing okay with God if you're getting rich. Whoa! How about the widows and the orphans that you're stealing from and all that? And riches will keep you away from being a faithful God person. If you depend on wealth, you ain't going to be dependent on God. And those are there, and they are there to be dealt with. What about riches? And that's a terrible problem for us, of course, because all of us are so rich. Well, I got to do this once more. Aren't you sorry? Next week we're going to talk about a whole lineup of people that they don't do cunning things, and they all learn that there. Thank you.